continuing where we left off. On top of page 579, middle of chapter 286. And just to put things into context, right? We're talking now, I think the Rabbi Rashab is bringing down the interface from the Kesser level and the Chochmas Demal level, the unconscious mind, and the Kesser level into, after Chochma Geluya, now he's carrying it further down into Eris and Kalim. Which means that the actual structure of existence, as the whole Hemshah begins, I don't know if those of you learn from the beginning, you'll know that the first 20 chapters, maybe 25 chapters, are all about how Er and Keli work with each other, are tailored for each other. So in a way he's going back to that now. And now he's explaining it in the context of the interface. There, it was just to discuss how Er and Keli work with each other, simply to define the map. That was in context of the difference between Makif and Pnimi Keser and the Kechus Pnimim. So the Makif is the encompassing, what they call the transcendent energy. Pnimi is the permeating energy. So now he goes back to the permeating and explains. So generally Makif, the Keser, Ratzon, in context of the whole Hemshach, of the whole series, Ratzon is really the interface between the one who wants and what he wants. But that's simply purely from the perspective of the wanter, which means in this case the divine. How does it fit into our structure? So here he's going to the whole Eris and Kalim. So after explaining, Er and Keli is Ayin and Yesh. We're talking about bridging these two realities. The selfless reality, where you don't matter and only the higher purpose matters, and the reality of our Yesh, of our being and our self. So how does self get integrated with that which is beyond the self, basically? That's simple terms, Er and Keli, Ayin V'Yesh, in Atzilus. So after explaining 3 levels of Bittul and the more details in the Ayin and Er, it moves over now to the Keli. And the Keli itself, in the middle of the discussion, that there's Primus HaKelim and Chetzenis HaKelim. As we discussed, the difference between a name, a description, a descriptive name, and a functional name. So describing what you are or what you do. So Chetzenis HaKelim is Shem HaKinui or Shem HaPu'ula, 2 different levels. Usually there's 4 names, just for the record, in Chassidus. But there are 2, like Shtayim Shem Arba. It's really 2 that are 4. The 4 names are Shem HaEtzem, Shem, which is like the name of the essential item. Shem HaToyar, a description of that essence. Shem HaPu'ula, the function of that entity. And Shem HaKinui is usually like a nickname, or something. It's not always a nickname. It's the lowest level of describing what its effects are. So when for example, they used to say Yankel the blacksmith. So blacksmith is a Shem HaPu'ula, Shem HaKinui, to the point that you can actually call him. People had that name, like Yankel the Geller, or Eli the doctor. So does the doctor reflect the etzem of the essence of his soul? Not necessarily. The point, however, is so these 4 names, in this case, etzem, Shem etzem goes on the earth, the energy. Shem ha-toyar goes on the primis ha-keli, which describes the energy. And Shem ha-kinui, Shem ha-pu'ula v'Shem ha-kinui, the function is the outer part of the keli, what the keli does. And he gave the whole explanation of a wise person. When you say somebody's wise, you could describe him as wise because he has wisdom and he's functioning as a wise person, but not necessarily you're describing that his fundamental personality is wisdom. Whereas if you describe Shem HaEtzem or Shem HaPu'ula, Shem HaTer rather, is actually a descriptive name of describing what that person is, which of course we know much less about people in that way. When people say, well, who are you? They'll give you their business card. They'll tell you what they do. And even though what they do may be they're very talented and it may reflect some of who they are, but to say who somebody really is a far different story. So Primis HaKeli is really the way that, on our terms, because we live in a world of Kelim, we live in a world of descriptions, we live in a world of shape and form. So on shape and form, the Primis HaKeli, that's what he's building now up, the case. This is a long discussion, how the Primis HaKeli, which is on terms of your identity, but there's the real identity as opposed to what you do most of the time. So in a way, simple English, it simply means that if you want to ever have that interface between yourself to the divine self, or like Ayin and Yesh, you have to some way begin to look at who you really are as opposed to what you do. Because if you define yourself by your activities, then the ego and the self, and I don't mean ego necessarily bad ego, just the defined self dominates. So the first step is to define and look for a person, like what are you really made of? Like when Jonathan Sachs, for example, Rabbi Sachs said about the Rebbe, you look at what can you be, not what you are. Which really means looking at a person for what they are able to do, not what they're doing. And that's the first step in any type of actualizing potential. But especially if you want to connect to the divine mission. Remember, the neshama comes down to earth with a mission of what it has to accomplish on this earth. And then it's dressed up in garments and it ends up being whatever it ends up being. You know, whether it ends up being a doctor or a lawyer or a writer or a asken or a Talmud Chacham. So when you really want to get back, retrace the roots, you want to know what is the neshama sent for. Now obviously, the ultimate goal is to reflect in what you do, who you are. You know, because it's not about creating a dichotomy. But you can't get there if you know, I just saw that video that was going around, the Rebbe, the beauty queen from Israel, Miss Israel. She went by the Rebbe, she told her that she's the beauty queen in Hebrew. She tells the Rebbe she was Miss Israel this year. And she asked for a bracha in success in Gashmis, Ruchnis, and Shidduch, and everything. And the Rebbe, as usual, she steps away, the Rebbe calls her back and says, we say, Sheker HaChaim Behevel HaYefi.
Oh boy.
What's that? Hold on. No. Yeah. Happy ending here. Sheker HaChaim Behevel HaYefi. In Hebrew he's talking to her. However, the Mefarshim explain that when you have Ki'im, Isha, Yiras Hashem, Hitisawel, then the Chen and Yefi is absolutely necessary, and it's part of the person. Sheker HaChaim without Yiras Hashem. If you only define a person by beauty, that's what the Rebbe said. Then the guy who brought her, then the guy comes over, the Israeli guy, and the Rebbe says, so you're the one that brought all the beautiful women? That's what the Rebbe says. He gives him some extra dollar. What I'm saying, it's an excellent way of understanding it. If you only have Chetzenis, external beauty, and that's all you judge, but the Torah Befedish absolutely says, first of all, we know even physical beauty from the Torah point of view. Zeh keli v'anveyu. You should have a nice esrog. An esrog for sure creates hadar, but a nice svarim, a nice sefer Torah, a nice mezuzah. I mean, there's a thing of having actual physical beautiful mitzvahs, beautifying God even physically. Mm-hmm. But if it's only external and it's missing the neshama, then it's like exactly that. It's just an outer. It's the package. But if the inner is there, then the package absolutely. You see in the Torah, there's a bracha when you say that the Imaz, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, they say Yifas Teir, Yifas Mara. It's not just spiritual. You know, Yifas Teir, Yifas Mara is explained either that they were sculpted beautifully or actually physical beauty. So the physical beauty is it says in the Tzaddik writes somewhere that why women are more beautiful, the Gemara says, is because they come from Malchus, which reflects the beauty of Velikus. So that's what it's meant to be. Unfortunately, we live in a world where it's easy to divorce the two, and then you can get distracted. So the point is, in other words, the Primis Hakeli is what you are, who you really are. The Chetzenis Hakeli is how you function. And obviously the goal would be bridging functionality, your function with your purpose, so to speak. So when a person's in whatever job they do, it becomes that this job is part of your mission in life. So in other words, so your Primis becomes expressed in your Chetzenis. Keli, we're talking here. The Sheker HaChaim quite interesting. There's a very interesting piece there. Okay, so I'm going to continue. So we're up to the middle of chapter 286. After explaining these two types of kelim, the outer and inner, and in context of the names, descriptive name and functional name, is called Shem HaPu'ula, Shem HaToyar. He now goes into explaining that this is also Lamaila, that the names of God are also kelim. And when you say Hashem Elokim, or Kael, or Havaya, or any name, so we use a name, of course, is descriptive. It's not that we know that God doesn't have a name. Say, Emechi Le'Yisram is Le'Bishum Eis, or Le'Bishum Kates. There's no definition. But when God manifests a name, what he's going to say here, what we learned here, is that it manifests, every name has two parts. So there's the name of God, that's the function. So for example, when you say Elikim, function, he creates. So by creation, call him a creator. That doesn't reflect necessarily the essence of God, it reflects the part that he creates. But he says within the name creator itself, for example, you also have two parts. One is the function of it, and one is a description of his power to create. So he gave the example from Shulchan Aruch, where it says, I'm looking at the bottom of page Tov Kuf Ayin Ches, 578. So he says, Yesh Leima Mashem Mavur b'Shulchan Aruch Erechayim. So what does it say in Shulchan Aruch? That when you say Shem Elikim, you have to have a kavanah. The halacha pashut. Nigla. So what's the kavanah? Shu takiv va'amitz, that God is takiv, powerful. Takiv is more than powerful, intense, and amitz, strong. And he has the potential or the power to do anything he wants, above and below. Okay, that's the lashon of Shulchan Aruch. When you say Elikim, that's what you have to be thinking of. So we say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu. So Hashem refers to the transcendent element of the divine. Elokeinu refers to how God creates. In this meaning here. So what does that Rabbi Shab explain? So what are you really saying when you say Elikim, according to this Pirush in the Shulchan Aruch? You're saying more than just his function. You're also saying what he's capable of. You're not just saying God created and gives you life and health and whatever it is. You're saying he has kayach b'elyenim tachtem. Etzem b'chinas hakayach v'ayichelis. That's referring to the essential power and ability of God. Should be yecholti lahavas elamis from nevroim adei ashir. That's the primus. Yeah. That's the primus of Shem Elikim. The chitzenius of Shem Elikim would be the function itself. Let's say din. When the Eibishter does din, you say Elikim is din as a judge. But that's here. But he's not talking about the power to judge. He's actually judging. So you say that's when you call him Elikim. So he's saying he has the power to do anything he wants, to create knivraim adei shir without any limit. Not only no limit at all, but also in the way they were created. In other words, what you're really describing is beyond the capacity, the infinite capacity to really create and do as it sees fit. And to affect the world and the universe according to his essential will. This is Shema Tayr. It's not Shema Etzem. Shema Etzem is the urge itself, the energy itself. Like you say Atzmos, let's say, even Atzmos is also, we're talking about That talks about the Atzmos. Example would be if you said, let's say, sunlight. That's not such a good example. No, let's not go there. Sunlight, I'm trying to look for sunlight. There's this, the light reflects what the sun is. Yeah. But that's not Kalim, so I don't want to go there. No. Anyway, so Shema Shematayid Etzem Alakush Shalamayim B'Kinis Hagili Be'Elamis. This describes God that's higher than the Gili and Elamis. If it was describing only the Gili, only how he reveals an Elamis, that would be Shem HaPula. That would be a functional name. So that, remember, this is the nimshal of the mashal, the same with us. When we say a name of somebody, you say a person is a chacham, are you saying that he's functioning as a wise person? And he gave examples of how you can function as a wise person and not be so wise. For example, a person who grasps well, even though he doesn't understand, he's able to repeat what others say. He gave an example of a person who through exertion came to understand. So if that person is through his efforts, he became a functional chacham. But you can't necessarily say he was born with a prodigious mind. That would be a Shem HaTorah. So here you're describing not what God is affecting, but what God is about.
But Shem HaTorah is not Atzmos.
No. In the words of the Ma'amer here, Shem HaTorah is the primis hakeli that describes the Oyer. And Oyer would be the Etzem.
Right.
Shem HaEtzem. It's also not Atzmos. Atzmos itself altogether is indescribable. Right. But we're talking about even, so here when we say, the fact that God can create something from nothing means that he has much more power than just that. That he's capable of doing a lot more than that, because it's not just like he happens to have that skill. Right. It means it reflects on something that is far, far more powerful. So when you say Elikim, that's what you should be mechavan. You could just, if you say Elikim and davening, you could just sit on this kavanah and not even move anywhere. It takes quite a while to absorb this. So Metayer Etzem Elakus Shalamayim B'chinas HaGilunus Hayu Lithol Pa'ula Hisavas Be'elamis. Higher than he is how he reflects the world, meaning higher than he is as he affects the creation of universe. And in this there is no limit at all. He's adding now another thing. He said that before by the Shem HaTorah as well. When you say a person is a prodigious mind, besides the fact that you're talking about what he's essentially made of, you're also saying that there's no limit to how far that wisdom can go. When you say someone is wise in actuality because he's wise based on what he's accomplished, because you're defining his accomplishments, you're not defining his potential. Remember, we discussed this, that this is by no means a justification for a person just to remain potential and not actualized. Like the Alter Rebbe said to that guy, to the Chassid, that a Lamdan is not someone who could learn, just like a Ganav is not someone who could steal, but someone who doesn't. That's what he said. But on the other hand, when a person has is a prodigious mind, he has that capacity and has no limits. When we talk about the outer expression, the function of the containers of the kelim, there it's with a limitation. So if you're describing God as what he actually created, he created a certain way. You're not describing what he's capable of doing. You're describing what he did, his function. That definitely has a definition and a limitation. And also the energy in existence has a defined is defined and limited. But the primus of Elokus, in other words, of the Kelim, there's no limit. Why? Because that is because there you're talking now about his ability, his capacity, his power, potential to create. And that is a blikvuldik power, because it's not saying you're going to create, let's say, Hashem created 7 heavens, 1 earth. The earth has a certain size, the moon has a certain size, there's a certain distance between the moon and the sun, etc., etc. But when he's saying Elokim as in Bali Yechelis, his capacity, then you're talking about the Primus HaKeli. So bottom line is, when you look at a Keli, never judge it by its cover. What you see is not what you get. What you see is its function. What its capacity is a whole different world. And that's what creates the bridge from the level of containers for us to climb the ladder back to godliness, to the source.
Transcends the laws of thermodynamics.
Okay.
He says the highest in the world, so you come to think that highest is spiritual, but there's a limited amount of highest in the world. We call that thermodynamics.
When he says the Chai Shalahem is Bechinis Gevul, is he talking about the Penimius of the Shema Torah, or is he talking deeper than that?
He's talking about the Chetzenius of the Shema Torah, which is Shema Pa'ula. When he's talking about Bechinis Gevul, he's talking about Shema Pa'ula, not Shema Torah.
Okay.
Shema Torah, descriptive name, is Primus HaKelim. And that describes the potential, which is unlimited.
Which is unlimited.
Yeah, okay. I mean, unlimited is relative. Remember, we're talking about on the level of containers compared to.
So this is the Chetzenius of the.
Yeah, in contrast to Chetzenius, which is Gvul.
Okay.
And it's Bechinis Bli Gvul, and it could have been in many different ways. In other words, he's explaining it's not just Bli Gvul quantitatively, also qualitatively. Could have created 11 spheres, not 10. Could have created an infinite amount of spheres, for example. Or could have created an Earth that was 1,000 times larger than our Earth, or whatever the proportions are. The point is, you're describing capacity, potential, as opposed to actual or function. Yeah.
And the capacity is unlimited, relatively.
Yeah. Well, with God for sure. And here too, just like he said before, that both the Keli is this, and also the Chayis is Mugbal. Now he's also saying here also the Eretz Mishabilti Mughal. In other words, you could argue that he has the capacity to create a container that's can create a world that's far different, but it's also the air is also the air in the Primus HaKeli is also unlimited basically. The truth is what he's saying really before he said is that the Primus HaKeli is describing the power of the air. He's going to discuss that later. Mm-hmm. But for right now, let's just argument's sake Bottom line is, the Pnimis HaKelim describes the infinite capacity. Now he's going to add, and generally speaking, the difference between Shema Pu'ula and Shema Teir, he's going to say, is the difference between Malchus and the 10 spheres. So before I continue, let me just explain. When you talk about the spheres, remember, the Chassidus, they're used in so many different ways. Think of it as God's tools, basically. So it's like a tool chest. So the spheres have all kinds of structures. You sometimes say Zah and Malchus, Midas and Malchus. Sometimes Chabad, Chagas, Nehi. Sometimes you don't count Malchus. Sometimes you count only the Midas. Sometimes 7 times 7 Midas, 49. I'm just saying it as just a general introduction to understanding that the spheres are essentially God's tools. Or you could say, God's palette. When he paints the existence, or creates existence. So what he's going to explain now is that, generally speaking, one of the structures of the spheres is that the 9 spheres, Chochmah through Yesod, create the essence of something, create the essential entity, and Malchus is the Pu'ula. Malchus is like the function. Is the functionality of it. In other words, if you have the 9 without Malchus, you basically don't have implementation. That's what he's going to say here now. So essentially, Malchus is Shema Pu'ula, and Zah, which would be Chesed through Yesod, would be the Shem HaTayar. So he says, so b'derech klal, Shem Pu'ula b'chinas ha-Malchus b'chol sfira. And remember, Malchus in every sfira, because Chochmah has Malchus, Chochmah has all 10, and Bina has all 10, etc. So the Malchus in every sfira is always the functionality of that sfira. In other words, that's why you would say Malchus goes down to Biyah. So Malchus, bottom line, without Malchus you don't have execution. You don't have implementation. So Kidua the B'chol Sfira, Malchus, so Kidua, the B'chol Sfira is Hates Sfira Sheba Helamaylam Mechinas Agili. The 9 spheres in each sphere, which means Chachmah through Yesod, are higher than Gili. They're not revealed yet. They are the components, they are we call the building blocks. The building blocks of that sphere, but they're not revealed yet. Only the Malchus within it creates the revelation. I'm also saying it because sometimes you find a Chassidus that Malchus you'll find doesn't have any energy of its own. It's like the moon, less lamagamah klum, and it's only expressing the other 9. It's not a contradiction to this. Because first of all, it doesn't say here Malchus has that power. It says Malchus is the 9 spheres as they manifest. But Malchus, on the other hand, doesn't have anything without the 9. So you really need essentially 10 spheres for anything to really become functional. That's why, for example, Rosh Hashanah we talk so much about Binyan HaMalchus, Binyan HaMalchus. Not just God as king. It's because if you have everything else and you don't have Malchus, you don't have a new world. Malchus is the way. When you say God is king, you're saying God. That's the way God creates existence. It's a relationship between the divine and existence. And now he's going to explain it with another example. So far we have examples like this. We have the name, the descriptive name, and we have the functional name. And now he's going to bring in, and now we talk about the spheres. And now he's going to say that the Kalim, the Zah, are like the colors of the light. Colors of light. The Kalim, the Zah, rak b'chinas gvanei ha'er, v'hainu b'chinas ha'gever ha'meira, rak ala etzem le'lifel ezedavar. So this is, this gets, you have to gets a little, what's the word for it? Nuanced here. So the energy itself, there's the colors of the light. So let's take, for example, when you look at a flame, there's the blue color, there's the yellow, there's the white, etc. But that's still not the function of the light. The function would be that the light warms us or illuminates. That would be a function. You'd say, Eir Haner in this case. It illuminates. That's a function thing. The color of the light describes the light itself before it's any function. So that's, he says, is Zah, meaning, in other words, not Malchus. And the Pu'ula, the function, is already, the function is the Malchus. It's Klei HaMalchus Sheba Shezah B'chinas Shem Pu'ula, the Chetzenius HaKelim.
The Gavni is that each Kli is expressing the property from the light?
Yeah. Primis Hakelim, yeah. Remember, it's subtle here because in the earlier discussions, the question is: does the light have a color, or does the light itself not have a color, and it's only the keli, the Primis Hakeli, that gives it color? For all practical purposes, in this Hemshech, light itself also has some shape and form. He's going to say that later. In other words, you're going to end up having here like this: the etzem is completely no definition. Energy has already definition, but it's not tangible. Primis Hakeli describes the etzem, but it's not its function. Chitzenis Hakeli describes its function. So really, this is, it's tremendous analysis. He's really dissecting it in unbelievable detail. Mm-hmm. If you really want to apply it to our lives, you'd have to really use a few experiments. You'd have to use a person, let's say, so you know his function. We always begin from the bottom up. We know the function of the person. Then you try to identify what is the identity of the person, like what are they really made of. And that's still not their air. It's only describing the color of their identity, so to speak. And then there's the identity, and then of course there's the essence beyond it all. So Zah is Primis Hakelim in this structure.
Or if you look at it differently, you can say it's all also.
Yeah, but he's not calling it He doesn't want to say it's right now because we're talking Primis Hakelim.
I understand.
Remember, there's a place where Primis Hakelim meets So there's that's why he said the Shem HaTeir describes the Shem HaTeir. Like when you say a person is a prodigious mind or a prodigy, born prodigy, you're really saying Primis Hakeli, that's the prodigy, but it's describing the essence of who this person is, in the intellect level at least. So you could distinguish between, you could say, like he said, the Chacham itself is but the description of it is Keli. But it's only a description without the function. So you have a description without, in other words, you have the thing, you're describing the thing, and you describe the function of the thing. It's three things at the end of the day. The first two, however, are almost inseparable. Because what's the difference between the thing and the description of the thing? Without function. But you see, like that's why he's using the example. Colors of light are an example. Because light itself, let's say you say, sun, the sun. The sun is sun. Then someone says, well, the sun looks whitish yellow. That's what light looks like. You're not describing its function, but you're also not describing. But you're describing what it is. But it's not the thing itself anymore. It's already a color of it. So in other words, look, it's all about the interface. It's all about retracing steps. How do you get from raw gashmis, yesh, chemer, to subtlety? And it's not one jump. You start with something that's extremely, extremely untamed, or whatever, completely what's the word for it? A raw piece of matter, or a raw yesh, and you slowly start saying, okay, this yesh has a function. The function, then it has an identity, and the identity has a soul, like that. So that's really what he's doing here. Okay, so so this is now, so what he established now is that Malchus in every sphere is the Pu'ula, is the function of that sphere, where the sphere is above Malchus is more a description of this thing itself. So for example, you say Chesed is love or kindness. When you reach into your pocket and give tzedakah, it's the Malchus of Chesed is expressing Chesed to another person. To put it in simple terms. But without the Malchus, Chesed is still love and kindness. And you can describe it, you can analyze it, and it's an entity. It's not Gvur. It has shape and form. But it doesn't have function. Malchus is the functionality of each particular sphere.
So it's how would you describe Kvariyah in that mashal of...
Kvariyah would you be describing one person's chesed compared to another's. For example, you say this person's chesed is a certain type of chesed, this person is a different type of chesed. Without functionality, you're just describing, let's say...
You only could describe it through the function, but
No, you don't have to describe it through the function. You could describe it through, if someone has an analysis of a human... we may not be able to see someone's chesed without a function, but you could, there are people who have a sense of a personality, even... Look, we said before, there are people who have prodigious minds and they never use them. If you're a trained eye, you can tell. You can say this person is a genius, but it's been unactualized. So you can't describe the person not without any function. Now, of course, you want to have both. You want to have... But I was just reading an article, we talked about this last time. A lot of children are misunderstood because they're just introverts, and they could be brilliant just because they don't speak and they're not aggressive. They're either shy, and sometimes you find out that a lot of children are written off as being stupid or being whatever, and then you find out that they're brilliant, but they just never expressed it. So a big part. Moshe, it's never too late.
That's why I'm here.
So the Gvania is in the
You
Keli.
remind me, but you know the story with Natan Galan Moore, but the Rebbe said the Unterschied is he speaks about himself. Someone else says it about someone else.
I just had to say it.
It's fine. It's good.
I just, you know.
It's not forever on the record. Remember.
No, it could be erased.
Your great grandchildren, actually, your great grandchildren are going to say, "My grandfather, he had." What do you say?
The Gvania is the Keli.
Primis akeli.
Is the previous Keli.
Eir is eir. Gvania eir is primis. Gvania is description
of the
essence of a person or identity of a person. You want to put it better. The identity of a person. It's not that simple to do. Of course, you can't just look at someone. All you could, when you see somebody, at best you only see their functionality. Even that doesn't necessarily tell you much. You know, some people are in jobs, they don't even want to do it. They're functioning simply by necessity or because whatever, they have to make a parnasa. Or you meet somebody like the classic stories. Like I said, there's a guy's dressed like a wood chopper, and he could be a tzaddik nister. What do you know from a function? But someone with a trained eye for sure can see that. Look, the Rebbe Rashab has the classic story with Moshe Mendelssohn, where he said to him, he was talking about the quality of Anoshim Pshutim. It was Simchas Teira Tafresh Memches. So there's a Maimer in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Tafresh Memches would be in 1888, 1887. So Rebbe Rashab is speaking very highly about the power of simple people. Anoshim Pshutim they don't have brilliance, they're not scholars, not Avdim, they don't see any miles in them. He spoke very highly. So Moshe Mendelssohn went into the Rebbe Rashab. It's a famous story. I said to him, Rebbe, after Simchas Teira, ad kadei kach, to that extent. So the Rebbe Rashab asked him to bring different diamonds of different values. Okay, the Rebbe asked. That's what he did for business. He was dealing with stones. So he put them out. The Rebbe Rashab chose one, said the largest one, and said, this is the most precious one. So he didn't want to contradict the Rebbe. So, the Rebbe said, I'm asking. So he said, it's not. But it looks so lustrous, looks so right, brilliant. So Rebbe, you have to have a trained eye. It's not what you see with the naked eye. I don't know if you said 4 C's, cut, carrot, color, whatever. So the Rebbe Rashab said to him, how much more so? If it's so that with stones, how much more so with neshamas? You have to have a trained eye. What do you know? He's asking me about ish pashut, not ish pashut. And Be'etzim, the Alter Rebbe says it in Tanya. I mean, this is like the sort of, I think, to me, it's the foundation of like all Chassidus, really. Mi yedei, Lamed Beis, Parak Lamed Beis, Mi yedei g'dulasam alasan. Right now, who's the greatest soul sitting in this room here? After Dr. Rose, Just... You see, we laugh. No, really, and I always say this by a Shabbos table, who's the greatest soul? Or in a big room? So is it the guy with the longest beard, the guy with the most knowledge, the guy with the... What? The answer is Alter Rebbe Paskins, we don't know. What do we know about souls? The Alter Rebbe says, Mi yudei g'dulasan u'malasan. So in other words, it's not by our functionality. The person who does the most mitzvahs is the greatest neshama? Absolutely not. Where does it say that? Some places it says the person with the most effort. If a person never grew up without Shabbos, without kashrus, then all the challenges in life, and does one mitzvah, in a neshama level, it could be far greater than someone who grew up with it and is able to do mitzvahs all day because it comes easily. In other words, my point is that you have absolutely no way, and we're not even talking now about, grubber things. We're talking here plain Yiddishkeit. You can't measure. That means that we really only see functionality at best. We only see it, and to really understand what's inside here, that's what he's trying to do here. Look, Chassidus tries to train us to look with different tools. You look at something, you see someone, and you see them differently than what they express. Now the key is not to be naive. That doesn't mean there aren't criminals in the world. It doesn't mean people can't hurt each other. It just means that everybody has far more than what you see. I mean, it's simple. If you ask me what this application, that's the bottom line lesson. So you have many stories in this, and this is the Lashon, this is how it is in the Lashon, this is the scientific, Chassidic way to put it. That the Pnimis HaKeli is reflective of who you are. The Cheshenis HaKeli is reflective of what you're doing, or your function. So that's Gvani Ha'er, and that's the Malchus of each Sfira. Aval HaKelim de'etzem HaSfira hu b'chinas Shem HaTeir. So the Pa'ula of the Sphira's function is Malchus. But the Kalim, that through this, it connects to the Etzem Ha'er, to the essence of the energy of the light, that's higher than Shpa, transmission and revelation. So the Malchus of the Sphira is the Pa'ula of the Sphira, Klei Malchus. The Kalim of the Etzem Sphira, what he called Kalim of Zah, or the first 9 spheres, both, either way, that's a Reish Shem Ater, that is like the colors of the light. They're bound with the energy. They're just describing the energy. That's what the Kalim are for. So the energy without Pnimis HaKalim doesn't have a description. The Pnimis HaKalim describes it. Malchus implements it. It's functionality. So essentially you can say the following, I guess, formula. That a person, we all have chesed in our soul. We have no idea what the capacity is. Capacity can be a tremendous amount that you've never exercised. We from time to time implement that chesed. It's a small amount of what you're capable of. That's the function. That would be the malchus of your chesed, and the chesed of your chesed, or all the spheres in the chesed, is all the possibilities, which can go who knows how far. So you can even say that some people, their functionality is more than other people who have more potential. So one person could have more potential, less implementation. Another person could have more implementation, less potential. Obviously, when it comes to Hamais or Iker, it's the bottom line. But nevertheless, you still want to. It's an analysis of what we're capable of. So now he goes back to something he began, if you remember, in the beginning of 576, in the chapter before, the beginning of 285, where he said the difference between Neshamas and Malachim is Neshamas come from Primis HaKelim and Malachim come from Chetzenis HaKelim. So this is a good example of how this how this works. So Malachim, their whole role is to be a messenger. That's why one Malach can't do 2 messengers, because all his job is functionality. So your job, you're the plumber. You're not the electrician. Like that type of thing. It's function, and defined by function. Every Malach has its function. So Gavriel is always going to be the messenger of things that are more din and gvura. Michal will always be the messenger that is always more chesed. Raphael is the messenger of healing, teferes. So everyone has their role. Neshamas come from Pnimis HaKelim, and Neshamas are first of all multifaceted, and as he's going to say let's read it inside. He said it earlier, but he's going to explain it now in context. He's concluding these 2 chapters now. The root of Malachim. Remember, everything is a transmitter of the divine energy. So a Malach is not a what we call a human entity. We usually define a Malach like ourselves, but with white wings or something. A little more sublime. But a Malach is essentially a shliach. Is essentially a messenger of the divine. It could manifest in a human being. It could manifest in an object. It could manifest in a message that comes your way. Technically speaking, when you say that, there's no grass in the field that doesn't have a malach, a mazel that tells it this, the grass is essentially, could be driven by a malach that's giving you a message. In other words, a malach doesn't always have to manifest in the human form.
So why we?
By Avram Avinu, it manifests that way, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Well, we all time brought up that a malach is Kodesh and all these 6 rings, whatever.
Look, there's malachim in different levels. There's malachim of Bria, malachim of Yitzira, malachim of Asiya. They have different names. Eifani HaKedesh. Eifanim is Asiya. Serafim are in Bria. And Chayas HaKedesh is in Yitzira. So you have 3 levels in malachim right there. So of course those are the malachim of those worlds. But a malach can take on many different shapes and forms. There are malachim from Atzilus also. My point is, it's very diverse. There's a sefer called Malachi Elyon from Reuven Margolis. It's called. He collects from all Midrashim, all Zohar, all Gemaras, every Malach, good ones and bad ones, and male and female.
Dan bij Malachim, male and female?
Yeah, female malachim too. Yeah. They're called malachas, no, not just. That's not correct. There are female. Yeah. You've ever heard Lilith? You've ever heard of Lilith? Lilith in Midrashim is one of the evil, shadim and all that. Let's not go into the cult here, but
That's a Thursday night covering.
yeah, that's a whole other discussion. That's not Chassidus doesn't go there so much. But the point, however, is the Alter Rebbe writes in the Kutei Torah Vayikra. The Rebbe brings Begay to Shlich that the Rebbe writes that Kol Darga that it goes from one level to another is called a Shliach, which is really a Malach. So even Eidei itself you can call really is a Malach as it reflects that. You don't call that usually a Malach, but if the definition of a Malach is a Shliach. So it's carrying a message. It's a messenger. Just broadening the definition. Malach Elyon, actually, when in my early years, when I worked in the Rebbe's library, so I found the Rebbe's Malach, and the Rebbe added a few Malachim that he didn't have in his book. In his handwriting, So there's some people who know all the Malachim that are all over the place, that are hovering. Look, Eliyahu Novi. What is Eliyahu Novi? Is he a malach? Is he a human being? What is Eliyahu Novi? It's not so simple. They say Eliyahu Novi never, Allah B'Sara Shemaim, he never really died. But what when it comes to Abris, what exactly does that mean? So there it's more like a malach. It's more a ruchnisdik thing. But then Eliyahu also manifests from time to time begashmis, right?
No, they are not.
That you're Eliyahu Novi. Okay, so that's a heifer. So what's the difference? She says, Malachim are from the outer containers. That's only function. That's the name of the functional name. That's why their role is only to transmit, to be messengers of the shefa, of the transmission. They're messengers. They carry the carriers of the transmission. Shefa. How do you translate shefa? Transmission, right? Yeah. Ashpa, yeah. Souls, on the other hand, are rooted in the inner containers. Shu Shem Ateyar, that's the other name, that's the descriptive name. So Malach, God sent, let's say, a Malach to Avram, the three Malachim. One was to destroy his name, one was to give him a Psura, the news that Sarah is going to have a child. And one was to heal him, right? So the news that Sarah is going to have a child, you have no idea what God is about. It's a message. That's all he's doing. He's bringing a message that you're going to have a child. It doesn't reflect the earth. It's a message that God sent him to do something. The Malach destroying Stoim. It's a shlichus. It doesn't at all. It's pure functionality, basically. Now, obviously, there's a kavanah in it all. Everything has a deeper reason. But the Malach itself, all he can tell you is that's what I was come to do. That's all. I can't tell you anything more. The Malach can't change the plan. He can't explain to you the plan. I was sent by the king. I came here to do a job. And he does the job and returns and finishes. That's it. That's a Malach's role. The Rebbe, when he explained in Tavshel Ches by one of the Fabrengens, before he was Rebbe, so there was a chess master there. What was his name? Rashevsky, not Rashevsky. I think Rashevsky. So the Rebbe edited the Sikha. I prepared it based on a lot of people who heard it at the time. It's edited in Yemei Bereshis. It's excellent. It's a beautiful Sikha. It's like a lesson from chess. So one of the things the Rebbe says there is that the rook and the bishop. Rebbe doesn't use the bishop, but the name bishop. But the rook and the bishop, they both can go across the whole board, but they can never go out of their line. And he compares it to malachim. Right. So they can do unbelievable things, but they never can change the plan. Whereas a queen, of course, can, and a king can, and so on. He says that the queen is Malchus, which is Neshamas, and the rook and the bishop are Malachim, and also the horse, the knight. The knight is also like a Malach. But the point is that they can only go in their kav. One goes diagonally, one goes was vertical and horizontally. I'm just saying, in other words, a malach, that's why you say mahalchim bein ha'emdim. A neshama can move. It doesn't just mean move, it means it can change course. And a malach, what means it stands? It just means, it doesn't mean it stands stationary, it means it can never go out of its kav. It's like this is its shape. Malach, machal, is chesed. The chesed is always going to be chesed. It can never change that thing. So, neshama, so, pimsekem shu shem atayah said, alkeina neshama b'yuridosim lamata, and that's why when neshamas come down below, ikrin yanim lahamshich hagili alakuz be'elam. That's why, as he said earlier, their thing is to reveal divine in the world. And as we explained, we're not talking about the divine of within existence. God created the world and it functions like a clock. And a neshama can bring in an energy that the world does not have on its own. Because a malach cannot do that. A malach can bring you a message. But a malach doesn't reveal elokus. That's not what their role is. They don't, because they're not reflecting they're not reflective of the divine. They're not describing the divine. They're doing the function of the divine in a particular fashion. He said that he spoke about it at length in the beginning of on 576. Okay. V'yesh leimer shezel mash neshamas Yisrael nikrat tzion. Yesh leimer, this is why neshamas Yisrael called tzion. Tzion as a sign. You know, like you say, like the Rebbe says, Askal at Tzion. Tzion is really a marker. That's what it means. That Tzion is a place, it's a gravesite. You call it Tzion is because it marks where the neshama was laid to rest. So they're called Tzion. That's what Tzion means. U'kamoi leimer Tzion amiyata. Like it says, leimer Tzion amiyata. U'pirish Tzion. What's Tzion? U'loshn siman. Sign. It's a sign, a mark, indicating that this Erein Sei Baruch Hu. That's what a neshama is. And another place he explains, this is the basic rotzen that's within the neshamas. In other words, the ratzon to be part of the divine, like when we say a neshama doesn't want and cannot ever be separate from the divine, from Elokus. What is called Tzion, that comes through Torah and Mitzvahs. Like before the pasuk Amiyata, it says, "Va'asim dvarei b'pficha," and I will place my words in your mouth. And then it says, "V'leimer Tzion Amiyata." So what's the connection? But through Torah, the neshama is revealed as being a sign of Elokus. In other words, bottom line is, he's saying is, it's not, on neshama here, if it doesn't do Torah mitzvahs, it's not going to be a sign of Elokus. It can do other things. Right, exactly. Commission is like explained earlier, chapter 282. That means that Torah mitzvahs, this is the Amshachah, this draws down the air atzmi, and through this, through Torah and mitzvahs, is the gili be'elamus. So neshama is not just a messenger. Neshama is a descriptive. Neshama is essentially reflective and descriptive of Erein Sof, of the divine. And through Torah and mitzvahs, it becomes a tzir. All this is a sign, a channel that draws down Elokus into this world. So Torah mitzvahs does not do the revelation. Torah mitzvahs is a tool, but with that tool, the neshama draws it down, becomes a Shem HaTeir. The descriptive name describes the etzem. Okay. I'm going to skip to the next mimer right away because they had learned here in the class this chapter. I could always do it later. The truth is, the Rebbe Rashab added these things later, these ends. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be learned. But it's somewhat, I would say, it's a little of an aside because essentially it goes back to the beginning of the Maimer and explained. The Rebbe Rashab, as you know, wrote the whole Hemshech without beginnings and ends. So it was one long flow, hundreds of pages. And later, when it came that Shabbos, he said the Maimer with a beginning and end, and then added in writing beginnings and ends to the Maimarim. So they divide them. But there was really one long flow. So essentially, this is where Esa Etzem, in the Ksav Yad, goes right to chapter 287 on page 581, Tov Kuf Pei Aleph, V'hinei. So in the Ksav Yad, you'll find Mina Etzem goes right to V'hinei. and there's no break. It's like one long flow. He also added other things. He added the summaries at the end of each chapter, and he added notes to each of the lines. You know, I've done a little research. I'm like studying exactly what he added what, because it helps understand sometimes. Because he added things, and this could be months apart. So what's really interesting is that summaries were added sometimes a year or two later. So reading a summary, he didn't write it b'shas he wrote the chapter. So reading a summary can be tremendous because he's summarizing it up much later. It sometimes gives you nuances you wouldn't find in the chapter itself. That's number one. And then a good signpost to help make some order here is the beginning of each mimer. He asks questions on the pasuk, and then it says, Yesh lahagdim, to understand this, we preface by everything we've learned. So again, he does a summary. So there's two summaries that help align things. I mean, I use that as tremendous to understand the flow, because the Rebbe Rashab is himself summing it up. So I'll just read on the Kitzur. Basically, what he uses now is everything we just learned about Primus HaKelim. He basically says, and that explains the pasuk Veschanon. I'll just say it quickly, Balpeh. Veschanon el Hashem, that Moshe Rabbeinu was being mamshich Primus HaKelim to the Jews. That's tefillah. That's essentially what he says in this section here. So he's applying what we just learned to the pasuk. But technically, you can learn it without the pasuk. So I'm going to just read the Kitzur on page 580, and I'm going to go right on. Kitzur, the dugma l'mayla for the two types of names, descriptive name and functional name, is the dugma l'mayla da Hashem es Kela Lakim and Shem HaPu'ula. The names of Kela, Lakim, and so on, that's the functional name. V'Shem HaTeir yesh lehem masha kavona Shem Lakim hu shaloi hakeach v'yechelis. And these names also have a deeper meaning. You see here, he's just saying Shem HaTeir yesh lehem. That's what we say. The Shem Lakim is its power and potential. V'hainu masha b'yicholti lahavish, his ability to create. That includes also to create, not the way it actually was created, that potential. And it also doesn't have that definition and limitation as the way it was created. And generally speaking, Shem HaPul is in Malchus, generally. And the Shem and the Teir, the descriptive name is the Kelim of Zah, of the Midas, Shein Gvanei Ha'er, that's the colors of the light.
What's a mochin?
Huh?
What are the mochin then?
What?
What are the mochin then?
He doesn't discuss it. He said test spheres first, it's the 9 spheres.
Okay.
And then he says the Kelim of Zah. These are interchangeable, but it's not going into the distinction between it. Look, every sphere has 10 within every one. The Malchus is the functionality. The Midas, the Midas within the Kelim of Zah would be the Pula. It could be Meichin, is more like Eir. You could say that maybe.
You can describe all these things, or he's going now doing it all as...
No, of course.
Yeah.
Everything is relative, right. Yeah. That you have to always keep in mind. Remember, this is all Atzilus. Compared to Beriah, all of Atzilus is Eir. Even the Kelim are Eir. But the bottom line is, at whatever level you're at, subtly speaking, there is distinction between Eir and Kelim. Then it becomes more manifest. I mean, in our world where we live in such a what's called a world of so much
Clavin particles.
compartmentalized world, we don't see the holistic, we don't see it as an integrated unit. We see pieces here, function here. We live in that fragmented world. But that's only externally. The truth is there's an underlying unity. In other words, if we have bchira, we have free will. But if we didn't, look at an animal in the wild. An animal in the wild is a keli for the earth that it was created for. It never wavers. There's no such thing as an animal deciding one day it's not going to do what it has to do. Or the sun is not going to rise in the morning. So besides humans, the universe does have a symmetry to it. The keli works according to the earth all the time. Now, I'm just using an example, but health is the same thing. A healthy born child breathes right, everything is smooth. Then when you start absorbing the toxins, and then bad habits or whatever it is, as the doctor can testify, essentially a body gets misaligned, out of sync with what it was supposed to be. There's no, like what he says in Tanya, the blood flow gets impeded. There's no, If we breathe properly, I don't just mean physically, the whole body breathe, the body would be a perfect container for the air of the neshama. Like before Chetei Tzadas, but it's not. So illness and other things create a split. So bottom line, Eris and Kalim, the way they're meant to be in Atzilus, they're aligned. In Elam Hazah, the only place we see the alignment is in nature. But there it's not necessarily aligned to Hashem, it's just aligned in functionality. A human being is meant to reveal, because here godliness is concealed. So technically speaking, Mashiach comes, you'll have a machine, the world, that will function exactly according to line to the way it was meant to be. But we will have initiated that. It didn't just happen. It will have done through our work.
Shibud Malchus Bilvad. The implementation will be where it's supposed to be.
Yeah, that's a good way. The Rebbe added once in the Sikha a whole sif. It's beautiful, but so practical, but also brilliant. He asked the question. It's in the Chelik Chafei L'Kut Sichas Vayigash. So he speaks there. That says the Gemara says there's an argument whether Ma'aseh Gadol or Talmud Gadol. Is study greater or action? What we're talking about here, functionality or? So the Gemara answers Talmud Gadol because Talmud Gadol Shemei V'Lidei Ma'aseh, because it has both. Not because Talmud is greater, but because Talmud brings to Ma'aseh, and Ma'aseh doesn't necessarily bring to Talmud. That's the expression. It's not a contradiction to Ma'aseh Iker. It's not asking which is the Iker. The Iker is of course action, but which is greater, which is more powerful. And then, but then it says in Kabbalah, and Chassidus brings it, that Mashiach comes, the Psak Din will change. It'll be Ma'aseh Gadol. That's what it says. Not Talmud Gadol. So the classic question is, what's the difference? It's the same thing. Talmud Mei V'Lidei Ma'aseh. What will change? Why suddenly now, action is always paramount, but why now Talmud is greater because it brings Ma'aseh, and then, so the Sikha had a beer from what the Rebbe said. The Rebbe added this, what I'm going to say right now. He wrote it. It's like, I was blown away.